Hey guys, and welcome back to another lesson. The famous jazz musician Charles Mingus once said that in jazz there are no wrong notes, only wrong resolutions. Now, there is an analog to this which I'd like to talk about that has to do with the way you play piano in general and harmony and so on, which has to do with the fact that a listener will accept some pretty outlandish stuff or experimental stuff as long as you give them something that ultimately sounds good. Let's start with the first example, and I'm playing an A major 9 chord here. And let me play a brief chord progression for you. Now, this sounded pretty good, at least in my opinion, and honestly, it would be difficult to explain this using some sort of easy to understand musical theory. However, there is something that makes this sound good, which is the fact that I'm using the same chord quality as I move around between the different chords. They're all major 9 chords. In fact, most of them even use the same shape, just transposed across the keyboard. The A major 9, the C major 9, not this F major 9, but this D major 9, back to the A, not this G major 9, but this C major 9, and this F major 9. Now, my point here is that there's something that gives the listener some sort of safety net, something they can relate to throughout the weird so-called changes, which is the fact that we're using the same chord quality and even shape as we move around. Now you might be saying, well, this might just work for major 9 chords and you're pulling our leg, but that's actually not the case. Let's take this minor shape here. This is an A minor, and I can move this shape around the keyboard and get this Now this brings me back to the underlying idea of this lesson, which is that listeners will accept some outlandish stuff as long as you give them a safety net, something they can relate to. Let's have another example. Let's say that we're going to move between a C major chord, or C major 7 in this case, and an F major, or F major 7. Now, I can insert chords between these two simple chords, right? So this would be a really safe and easy to understand chord progression for pretty much any listener. And this gives me some freedom to insert between these chords some stuff that would maybe have a little bit more tension or even stand out. So I can move, say, chromatically between these two chords, and honestly, if you were to ask me, would you put an F sharp 9 sharp 11 chord between these two chords, I really wouldn't think too much of it, just because this wouldn't be maybe the first thing that would pop to mind. But it naturally comes out when I try to do this chromatic motion between the chords. And I can, again, think about doing something chromatic before going back to my C major. Now let's take this even one step further. Let's again have a C major chord going to an F major chord. A very easy, palatable progression. And let's try to add some outlandish chords between them. Again, it would be not necessarily very easy to explain these transition chords, these weird chords are put between the C and the F using conventional theory. But they seem to work because you're giving the listener something familiar to hang on to. This, have two very harmonious chords with some weird stuff in between. Let's have another example. Say we're in the C major scale, and we're playing a 6-2-5-1 progression. Basically, we're playing the 6th, 2nd, 5th, and 1st degrees of the C major scale, and this is a very again, palatable chord progression. It even has a classical feel to it. So for example, something maybe Beethoven would play. So we're giving the listener something that is easy to relate to in the left hand. We're giving them a progression that is harmonious, palatable, falls within diatonic harmony, Western harmony, and so on. Now, in the right hand, let's do something that is also somewhat palatable, which is a chromatic motion. So starting from an E flat to a D, to an A flat, to a D flat to a C, we can have this progression. And now let's combine both of them. Now, they are going to clash. But they still sound pretty good together because the listener, or the listener's mind, is hearing two things that are harmonious, each in their own right. So they're willing to, let's say, accept the clash between these two because they both have a strong sense of resolving to something in a very easy, harmonious way. Now we can take this further. Let's say that instead of just even playing the bass notes, we'll play dominant 7th chord. So let's say an A dominant 7, to a D dominant 7, to a G dominant 7, to a C major 7. If you want, you can also play inversions. It doesn't really gonna matter for this demonstration. And now let's combine both of these together. And suddenly we start getting these advanced quote-unquote chords like this A7 flat 5 flat 9, a D dominant 7, a G7 flat 5 flat 9, and a C major 7. Now, we didn't really have to go into any deep theory, we're just combining simple motions here. Let's try doing something chromatic from a different starting point, let's say starting from F. And playing the same progression in the left hand. A, D, G, C. Again, this sounds pretty good together because the listener is willing to accept each of the simple motions in each of the hands. And you'll see how these complex, advanced sounding chords naturally arise when you do this. And you get this A7 sharp 5 sharp 9, this would be a D13 sharp 11, G7 sharp 5 sharp 9, and a C major 7 or a major 9. So I hope you get a drift of my point, which is that you can try some weird stuff as long as you give the listener something that is also easy to relate to. I hope these examples have given you some food for thought and that you've learned something interesting, and I will see you next time.